Pop the trunk, the constable said it the way some men say grace, like it was owed to him. Nadia Whitecloud kept both hands on the wheel, 10 and 2. She had learned that the way other kids learned to ride a bike from a father who said it more times than he said goodnight. The dome light was already on. She had turned it on herself the moment the cruiser's strobes lit up her mirror, 3 kilometers outside of Carberry on a stretch of Highway 1, where the prairie went black and endless, and the only thing taller than the wheat was the grain elevator behind her, 10 minutes back, holding the last of the daylight. There's nothing in the trunk but a cooler and a duffel bag, she said, and a wrapped gift. I'm telling you that now before you ask, so there are no surprises for either of us. Constable Wade Pruitt did not like the word surprises. He did not like anything about the woman in the truck, if he was honest with himself, which he rarely was at this hour, 11 at night, 4 coffees deep, the Jets having blown a 2-goal lead in the third. He had run her plate twice. Manitoba clean registered to a numbered company out of Winnipeg. That bothered him. A new Ford, the half-ton kind that ran 60,000 off the lot, dark, lifted, mudless, a numbered company, and a brown woman behind the wheel at 11 at night driving east toward the city instead of west toward the reserve, where in Pruitt's private and unexamined arithmetic she belonged. That was the whole case. He would never have said it in those words. He didn't need to. The arithmetic ran underneath everything he did, quiet, like the hum of the cruiser's engine. He had her out of the cab inside 2 minutes. She stepped down without being asked twice, hands visible, movement slow, and announced, "I'm reaching for the door handle now. I'm stepping down now." Her voice did not shake. That was the part that got under Pruitt's skin worse than anything. A guilty person begged or argued or went stupid with fear. This one narrated herself like she was reading the evening news, and her calm made him feel, somewhere he wouldn't look at, like the smaller animal in the situation. The second cruiser came over the rise slower. Detachment unit out of Brandon. The door opened and a young officer climbed out. Constable Emily Roy, 9 months on the job, body camera clipped dead center on her chest, the little light blinking red. Roy was 24. She'd grown up in St. Pierre-Jolies, the kind of town where everyone's grandmother went to the same church and the priest knew your sins before you did. Her mother had wanted her to teach. She'd wanted, instead, to be the person who showed up on the worst night of a stranger's life and made it 1 degree less terrible. In 9 months, she had not once managed it. She saw the truck. She saw the woman standing at the tailgate, hands loose at her sides, doing every single thing right. And her stomach folded in on itself because 5 weeks ago, on this exact shoulder of this exact highway, she had stood in this exact spot and watched Wade Pruitt do this to a 62-year-old man. His name had been Joseph Cardinal, a retired school teacher from Sioux Valley, driving home from his granddaughter's hockey tournament in Portage. Pruitt had spent 40 minutes on his Corolla. He'd pulled the man's reading glasses out of the console and set them on the roof and left them there while he searched. And a prairie wind had come through and knocked them to the gravel, and Pruitt had stepped on them getting back into the cab, not by accident. And Joseph Cardinal had stood with his hands folded in front of him and cried without making any sound at all. Roy had stood beside the cruiser that night and said nothing. She'd driven home. She'd watched her own body camera footage in her kitchen with the lights off and a cup of tea going cold beside her, and she had not slept properly since. Every shift after that, she charged her camera to 100% and carried a spare battery in her belt pouch and told herself that a braver version of her was coming, that next time the words would be there. She walked toward Pruitt's bumper. Tonight, she understood, was next time. Roy. Pruitt didn't look at her. He nodded at the truck the way a man points out a deer he's already decided to shoot. Watch this, educational. He spread his hands like he was laying out evidence to a jury. Brand new truck, numbered company on the reg, tinted glass, driving the wrong way at the wrong time. You see all 4 of those line up. You've got your cause. My field training officer taught me that, 20 years on this highway. He was never wrong about a dirty vehicle, not once. Roy said nothing. The red light on her chest blinked once a second, patient as a heartbeat. Pruitt circled the truck. He made a show of sniffing at the open driver's door. You smell that, Roy? Air freshener, heavy. That's a cover scent. 9 times in 10, somebody's covering product. It's cedar, Nadia said from the tailgate. Her voice stayed level. It's a sachet my grandmother makes. There's no product in this vehicle. There are no narcotics. There's a lawfully stored firearm, secured, which I'm going to tell you about before you find it, because I would rather you hear it from me. I didn't ask you to talk. He kept circling. He shone his flashlight through the back glass, then through the windshield, into her face, into her eyes. Look at that, Roy. Pupils. He's lit up on something. Nadia's pupils were a perfectly ordinary size in the harsh white light, and Roy could see that, and Roy said nothing and hated the silence in her own mouth. Then Pruitt got into the cab and the long ugliness of it began. He yanked the glove box open and dumped it onto the passenger seat. Registration, insurance slip, a tire gauge, a small soft-covered book of Cree syllabics with a worn spine. He flipped it open, found nothing he understood, and let it fall into the footwell. Underneath it was a photograph, black and white, a young man in the dress uniform of a soldier, narrow shoulders, a face that hadn't decided yet whether to smile. Nadia's grandfather, 19 years old, the only photo of him she owned. Pruitt dropped it face down on the floor mat and put his boot on the edge of it and left his boot there, while he reached for the duffel in the back seat. The zipper caught. He took out his pocket knife and sawed through the side of the bag. Folded clothes spilled onto the seat. A dress, deep blue, pressed that morning and laid flat with tissue paper between the folds. He shoved it aside with the back of his hand, and one sleeve dragged through a smear of road grime on the door sill. He found the cake next. A small white bakery box on the passenger floor tied with string. He flicked the string off and opened the lid, and the smell of butter and vanilla came up into the cab. Happy 70th Kokum in looping blue icing. He took the pocket knife, still open in his hand, and pushed the blade down through the center of it and dragged it the length of the box. They hide product in cake sometimes, he said, conversational to Roy, to no one. Icing clung to the blade. He wiped it on the upholstery in one long lazy streak. At the tailgate, Nadia did not move. She did not speak. She breathed, slow counting, the way she had counted her breaths face down in the mud of a flooded ditch in the Red River Valley, with the water rising and a sandbag line failing 40 meters away and 200 people's homes on the wrong side of it. She had counted her breaths through worse than Wade Pruitt. She could count them through this. Roy watched the cake fall apart under the knife and felt something in her chest go tight and hot. She did not log the search. When Pruitt called for the K9 and the dog came, a Belgian Malinois named Bishop, 6 years old, handled by a man who'd played junior hockey on the same line as Pruitt 20 years back. She watched the dog walk the truck once. Didn't alert. Pruitt stepped to the front wheel well and tapped it, twice with the toe of his boot, 2 soft, deliberate thumps that any microphone within 10 feet would catch, and the dog sat, and the dog barked, and Pruitt clapped his hands together like a man who'd just won a bet. There it is, alert, probable cause. Roy did not log it. Roy keyed her shoulder mic, and her voice came out quieter than she expected and steadier than she had any right to hope. Dispatch, Brandon Unit, be advised, K9 alert at this location was immediately preceded by an audible contact with the wheel well by the searching officer, captured on my body cam, noting it for the record. Pruitt's head came around like it was on a hinge. What did you just say? I said, what happened, Wade? You little? Constable Pruitt. It was Nadia from the tailgate, and the flatness of her voice cut clean through both of them. I do not consent to this search. I am stating that on the record, respectfully. And I'm informing you that what you're doing right now is unlawful, and that it is being recorded. Pruitt turned and grinned at her, the grin a man uses to paper over the fact that he just heard a word he didn't expect. Sweetheart, you've been watching too much American TV. And he ducked back into the cab. He found it under the driver's seat. He pulled the floor mat free and the flashlight beam dropped, and there it was, a flat steel case, matte black, bolted to the floor through 4 anchor points, a combination dial set into the lid. He went still the way a fisherman goes still when the line finally pulls. Well now, he said softly, what we got here? He straightened, turned to her, the swagger flooding back into him. Open it. That's a federally compliant lockbox, Nadia said. Inside is a secured firearm, lawfully stored in government identification. I'm telling you the contents in advance voluntarily for your safety and mine. I'm asking you to stop this search and call your supervisor. Open the box. I'm asking you to call your supervisor, Constable. Open the goddamn box. She walked to the driver's door. She knelt beside the seat. She turned her body so that the red blinking eye on Roy's chest would see her face, her hands, every motion. She spun the dial, 1 number, 2, 3, 4. The lid lifted on a soft breath of cool air. Pruitt leaned in over her shoulder, hungry, his flashlight pooling white into the case. On top lay a leather credential wallet, dark, the corners gone soft with handling. He lifted it out and flipped it open, and the flashlight caught a laminated card. A photograph, the woman in front of him looking straight into a camera in a flight suit, hair pulled back, no expression at all. The card read, in raised federal lettering, Department of National Defense, Captain N. Whitecloud, Royal Canadian Air Force, 435 Transport and Rescue Squadron. And below that, in smaller type, a line that meant nothing to Wade Pruitt and everything to anyone who had ever needed one. Search and rescue technician. His grin did not fade. It died, not slowly. It died the way a porch light dies when the wires cut behind the wall. He set the wallet down on the floor mat. His hand was not steady anymore. He reached into the case again and lifted out the second thing, a small flat presentation box, the kind that holds a medal. He opened it. Against a bed of dark velvet lay a cross, bronze, a maple wreath, suspended from a ribbon of deep red. The star of military velour. Beneath it, folded once, a citation he didn't read and wouldn't have understood if he had, describing a night in the mountains of a country he could not have found on a map. A hoist cable, a burning vehicle, 4 soldiers brought up one at a time through small arms fire by a SAR tech who went down last and came up last. The cicadas. No, not cicadas. This was the prairie. It was the wind through the wheat that had been hissing along the shoulder for the better part of an hour. The wind dropped all at once. A grain truck went by southbound, headlights sweeping across the scene, not slowing, not seeing. On that shoulder, at that second, there were 2 people. One had stopped breathing, the other was counting. Pruitt tried to climb back into his own voice. This stuff. He turned the metal box under the light, looking for a flaw, a seam, a tell. Anybody can buy this online, surplus. eBay, I've seen the fakes. Guys cosplay this, military LARPers, they order it in the mail. Constable Pruitt. Nadia rose from the floor of the cab. She stood up straight. She was not taller than he was. They were nearly the same height. But something in how she stood made the cab smaller, made the whole roadside smaller, made the 20 years of his field training officer's wisdom shrink down to what it had always been, which was a story 2 men told each other to feel like hunters instead of what they were. My name is Captain Nadia Whitecloud. I serve in the Royal Canadian Air Force. The credential in your hand is the property of the Department of National Defense. The medal in your other hand was awarded by the Governor General. You are presently holding 2 pieces of federal property that you removed from my locked vehicle without a warrant and without my consent. I'm going to ask you one time. Put them back in my hand. Pruitt did not move. She reached, slow and visible, into the chest pocket of her jacket and took out a phone, not the kind he expected. Matte, rubberized, no logo, a small crest stamped in dull metal along the edge. I'm placing a call. On speaker. Constable Roy's camera will record it. A single ring. A man's voice, awake, flat, military clean. 8 wing operations, Major Lassard. This is an open line. Identify. Major, it's Captain Whitecloud. I'm being unlawfully detained on Highway 1 east of Carberry by an RCMP constable who is currently in possession of my ID and my decorations, removed from my locked vehicle without warrant. I need you to log this call and notify the duty officer, the Commission for Public Complaints, and the detachment commander in Brandon. Copy all, Captain. Logged at 2311, notification underway. Stay on the line if you're able. I'm able. Standing by. The phone stayed live in her hand. The little speaker hissed faintly. Pruitt stared at it the way a man stares at a thing he's already lit and can't unlight. Okay. He pushed both hands toward her, the wallet, the metal box. Okay, look, there's been a misunderstanding here. Take them. We're good. Take them back. She did not lift a hand. No, Constable. You seized those as evidence of a crime you decided I'd committed. They stay in your custody until your supervisor arrives and documents the chain. That's the procedure. You don't get to skip it because you don't like where it's going. He flushed, dark, then pale. Come on, I was doing my job. You get that, right? You of all people. Stop talking. She said it without heat. Anything you say now is on Constable Roy's recording. I'm telling you that for your own protection. He shut his mouth. Roy stepped forward then, not toward Pruitt, toward Nadia. She stopped half a step behind the captain's shoulder, and she looked down at her own camera, checked the red light one last time, and keyed her mic. Dispatch, Brandon Unit. I need the detachment commander to this location, priority. And I'm requesting that body cam footage from 5 weeks ago, the stop involving Joseph Cardinal at this same location, be pulled and preserved. There's audio on it of a wheel well contact immediately before a canine alert. I'm requesting preservation as a witness. The dispatch line went quiet for a full second. Copy, Brandon Unit. Preservation request log 2312. Stand by. Pruitt lunged a half step toward her, not violent, desperate. Roy, what are you doing? We're partners out here, you and me. She did not step back. She looked at him straight on. I should have said it 5 weeks ago, Wade. I'm saying it now. You stupid little. I'm not stupid. I was scared. Those aren't the same thing. Her voice didn't rise. I'm done being scared tonight. He stood there with the medal in his hand, and there was no direction he could turn his head that didn't have his ending in it. Sergeant Daniel McKenna got there in 11 minutes. He braked hard on the gravel and sat behind the wheel a long moment, both hands on top of it, looking through his windshield at the scene. The gutted truck, the cake split open on the seat, the woman standing straight-backed with a phone live in her hand, the constable holding a medal he didn't know how to put down. McKenna was 58. He'd been a reservist before he was a Mountie a long time ago. He'd been hearing things about Wade Pruitt for the better part of 2 years, and he'd done nothing with them. And as he sat there in the dark with his hands on the wheel, he understood, with the particular clarity that comes too late, exactly what his nothing had cost. He got out. He walked straight to Pruitt, and he did not say hello. Wade, give me your badge and your sidearm now. Sarge, listen, this is the badge. McKenna unpinned it himself. He had Pruitt draw the sidearm left-handed, 2 fingers, and set it on the hood, and Pruitt's hand shook so badly the pistol knocked the metal twice before it lay still. McKenna took the metal box from him, gently, and slid it into a clear evidence sleeve from his belt and sealed it and wrote the date and the time across the seal in black marker while Pruitt watched. Then he turned to Nadia and took off his hat and held it against his chest with both hands. Captain Whitecloud, I'm Sergeant McKenna, Brandon Detachment. On behalf of this detachment, and as a man who wore a uniform himself once, I'm sorry. What was done to you tonight is not what we're supposed to be, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's the first time it's happened on this road. I'll only promise you it's the last. Nadia held his eyes. She was not cruel about it. She was not soft about it either. Sergeant, with respect, your apology matters less than what happens after I drive away. I'll judge this detachment by what's in the news in 90 days, not by what you say to me on this shoulder tonight. McKenna nodded slowly and put his hat back on. That's fair, Captain. That's fair. He turned to Roy. Constable Roy, you did the right thing tonight, and I know what it cost you to do it. You're taking the next 24 hours paid. You're going to write a statement, every detail, while it's fresh. And then you and I are going to sit down and talk about 5 weeks ago. Roy's eyes shone. Just for a second, she held them open. She didn't let them spill. Yes, Sergeant. McKenna put Pruitt in the back of his own cruiser, uncuffed because there was no need. The man had gone somewhere behind his own eyes and wasn't coming back tonight. Through the glass you could hear him, faint, saying it over and over to no one. The dog alerted. You saw it. The dog alerted. The dog alerted because you tapped the wheel, Wade, McKenna said, not unkindly, to the closed door. I've seen that move on tape twice this year already. Joseph Cardinal, a teenage kid outside Soros. I should have moved on you in the summer. I didn't. That part's mine. He let the rest of the sentence go unsaid, because the rest of it was Pruitt's, and they both knew it. Roy crouched on the gravel and gathered up what she could. She found the photograph of the young soldier face down by the pedals. She brushed the grit off it with her sleeve, careful at the corners, and she carried it to Nadia in both hands the way you carry a folded flag to a widow. Captain, I'm sorry, for tonight and for 5 weeks ago when it wasn't you and I stood there and I didn't. Nadia took the photograph. She looked at her grandfather's 19-year-old face for a moment, then back up at the young constable. How old was the man 5 weeks ago? 62. And you've thought about him every night since? It wasn't a question. Yes. Then you already did the hardest part, Constable. The standing there and hating yourself part. Most people stop there. They make a home in it. Nadia tucked the photograph into her jacket over her heart. You didn't. You came back out here and you turned the camera into the thing that mattered. Remember, that's what worked tonight, not this. She touched the credential wallet on the floor mat through the open door. This shouldn't have to be in the truck for a stop to go right. It went the way these things go when a record exists and someone is finally willing to look at it. The independent investigation unit took the file within the week. The footage from 5 weeks before, Joseph Cardinal, the broken glasses, the cued dog, came out of the evidence locker exactly where Roy had said it would be. Wade Pruitt was charged. Obstruction, fabricating evidence, unlawful search, assault under color of authority. His field training officer, the man with 20 unbroken years of being never wrong, was named in the review and quietly retired before it concluded. Sergeant McKenna did not run out the clock to his pension. He gave a statement to the inquiry, on the record, naming every warning he'd let slide, and then he asked to be reassigned to recruit training, where he spent his last years teaching young constables a single unit he wrote himself, on the duty to intervene, which he opened every term by playing 2 pieces of footage, the stop at mile marker that ended a career, and the stop 5 weeks before it that should have. He played them in that order on purpose. Emily Roy was not fired. She was, for a while, alone in a way that small-town detachments make a person alone. The silences in the locker room, the partners who suddenly preferred to ride single. She wore it. A year on, she was asked to speak at a policing and reconciliation forum in Winnipeg, and she stood at the microphone and told the room about a kitchen, a cup of tea gone cold, a light she'd left off, and 3 nights she hadn't slept, and how next time had almost become never, the way it almost always does. And Nadia Whitecloud got back in her truck that night and drove the last 40 minutes to the city with her grandmother's cake ruined on the seat beside her, and she went in, and her kokum, 70 years old the next morning, small and straight-backed in a housecoat, took one look at her granddaughter's face and didn't ask about the cake at all. She put the kettle on. They sat at the table until the sky over the city went gray, and then pink, and the old woman held the cracked photograph of her own father in her 2 hands and said something in a language Wade Pruitt had held in his palm an hour earlier and let fall to the floor of a truck because it meant nothing to him. A year after that, Captain Whitecloud stood on a hoist platform in the open door of a cormorant over Lake Winnipeg, 200 feet up, training a new SAR-tech on the cable, and she did not let go of his harness until his boots were solid on the deck, and she held it 3 full seconds longer than the drill required, the way someone had once held on too long for her. Out on Highway 1 east of Carberry, the shoulder by the grain elevator is just a shoulder again. A cruiser sits there some nights, and some nights it doesn't. And the constable inside is sometimes a person who would tap a wheel well, and sometimes a person who would never. The wind still comes through the wheat the way it always has, indifferent, enormous, older than the highway and older than the detachment and older than every story 2 men ever told each other, to feel like the bigger animal on a dark road. So here's the thing I keep coming back to, and I'll say it plainly because the story's earned it. Nadia Whitecloud had a credential in a steel box that turned the whole night around. Most people don't. Joseph Cardinal didn't. The kid outside Souris didn't. Almost nobody pulled over on a black highway at 11 at night has a star of military valor under the driver's seat to make a cruel man suddenly polite. That's not what saved the night. What saved the night was a 24-year-old who had failed once, who carried the failure home and let it keep her awake, and who came back out onto the same shoulder of the same road, and when it happened again in front of her, reached up and touched the little red light on her chest and chose, finally, to be a witness instead of a bystander. So I'll ask you the hard version, not the easy one. Not whether you'd speak up if you were a captain with a medal and a secure phone and the whole weight of the crown behind you. Anybody's brave with that in their pocket. I'm asking whether you'd be Emily Roy 5 weeks before the medal, standing on the shoulder of a dark road, your light blinking red, watching it happen to somebody with no credential at all, no phone call to make, nobody coming. Would you hit record and walk away? Or would you do the thing that costs you the locker room and the easy shifts and the friends you grew up with? Be honest down below. The next person on that highway won't be a captain. The next person on that highway is just a person. The only question that has ever mattered is whether anybody nearby is willing to keep their camera on for someone who isn't famous, isn't decorated, isn't anybody at all. Especially then. I've thought about that steel box under the driver's seat more than I expected to. Not because of what was in it, but because of how little it should have mattered and how much it did. Nadia Whitecloud had a credential and a medal in that box, and the moment Wade Pruitt saw them, he turned polite. That's the part that keeps me up. A man who'd just split a birthday cake open with a pocket knife and ground a grandfather's photo under his boot suddenly remembered his manners, not because he found his conscience, but because he found out who she was. Take the box away, and Nadia is Joseph Cardinal on the side of that road. She's the kid outside Souris. She's anybody, and the cruelty just runs its course. So I don't think the lesson lives with Nadia, even though she's the one the whole night turns on. I think it lives with Emily Roy, who had nothing in a box at all. What Roy carried home 5 weeks earlier wasn't a medal. It was a sick feeling and a cup of tea gone cold and 3 nights of no sleep, and she could have done what most of us do, which is make a quiet home inside that guilt, and call it being a good person who simply had bad luck with the timing. She didn't. She turned the feeling into a plan. She charged the camera. She carried the spare battery. She decided, in advance in the cold light of her own kitchen, who she was going to be the next time. And then she had to actually be that person while a man she'd grown up trusting screamed in her face on a black highway. That's the whole thing right there. Knowing what's right is the easy part. Most people manage it. Caring enough to act is harder. Standing there and doing it anyway, when it costs you the locker room and the easy shifts and the friends, that's the rarest thing a person owns. And notice how the causes ran. Pruitt's certainty came from a story his training officer told him for 20 years, and certainty with no one willing to check it curdles into cruelty every single time. McKenna's silence wasn't malice. It was just 2 years of not quite getting around to it, and his nothing had a body count. Roy's one small choice, a finger touching a blinking red light, undid all of it. Nothing supernatural turned that night around. A frightened young woman thought clearly about what she'd do, found the backbone to do it, and refused to let a man be ruined just because she'd be more comfortable looking away. So I'll leave it where Nadia left it. Most of us will never have a medal in a box to make a cruel person suddenly kind, but every one of us, sooner or later, will be standing on some shoulder of some road with our own little light blinking red, watching it happen to someone who has nothing. What you do in that exact second is the only measure that's ever counted.